Hi there, my name is Sheevo, and to be honest, this is RWBY Grimm Eclipse. To start off, RWBY Grimm Eclipse is Rooster Teeth's game based on one of their flagship shows, RWBY. In this video, I plan to give an overview of the game, as well as my opinions on what was done well and what was done badly. I'll also be giving my honest verdict on the game as a whole at the end of this, so stick around if you'd like to hear it. Also, keep in mind that this video is about the single-player aspect of the game. I might make another video in the future regarding multiplayer, but for this video, I'm going to stick to the offline single-player mode. That being said, let's kill it. If you've never played the game and don't want me to spoil the story for you, you can skip to
3 minutes 12 seconds.
The game's storyline is set between volumes 2 and 3 of the show. It is supposed to be canon to the show's lore. Looking at it, however, I don't really see how it fits in anywhere at all, as practically none of it pertains to anything mentioned in the show, save a couple points which were obviously thrown in just to tie the two together. In the game, Team RWBY is tasked with investigating control centers, the use of which we will never know, which have mysteriously gone down. They are led through the first half of a dozen missions by Professor Port and Dr. RWBY. Along the way, we encounter a couple different mutated Grimm, which doesn't exactly make sense, but we'll get to that in just a bit. Around 3/4 of the way through the game, we finally discover the antagonist, one Dr. Merlot. Ozpin somehow knows him, and he was apparently responsible for the Mountain Glen incident. Merlot has since been experimenting on Grimm with a serum he has been formulating and refining. Now, I'm going to stop right there for a minute because this does not make sense. In the show, we learn that nobody knows much about the creatures of Grimm because they die if kept in captivity for very long at all. So, I don't know what's up with this little guy, he must just be out of it. He doesn't even see me, apparently. If you've seen the show, then you know that Grimm evaporate soon after they die, so that makes examining a dead body impossible. Also, you can't expect me to believe that it's easy to catch Grimm, but apparently Merlot can just magically lure them into boxes. I don't know, maybe he hired some shady huntsman to do it for him, but in that case we never hear about them, let alone see them. Heck, if that were true, maybe we could fight them. Now that would make for some interesting gameplay. But I digress, let's get back to the story. Getting back to Merlot, his motive is never really specified, so I can only assume he's trying to gain power by gaining control of the Grimm. That or he's just insane. Anyway, by accidentally boarding one of his cargo ships, we find Merlot's base of operations, a remote island somewhere in the middle of the ocean. Now this doesn't quite make sense either, because if his headquarters are located on a waterbound landmass, how did the mutant Grimm we fought earlier in the game get there? Did the guy take the time to ship his experiments, which should already be dead mind you, back to Vale and just let them loose? And if it was supposedly part of his experiment, how in the world was he monitoring them? He didn't know we were coming for him, so he couldn't have had any cameras set up, or he would definitely have seen us. Anyway, after finding the good doctor's secret hideout, we must break in and destroy his serum. After we do that, he sicks a mutated Deathstalker on us, we kill it, Merlot blows up the lab, and we fly off in a ship that Ozpin sent for us. Not a terrible story in and of itself, but it doesn't work well when tied to the show. Also, it is extremely slow-paced, getting through maybe 30 minutes worth of content in about 2 to 3 hours of casual gameplay in normal mode, and adding nothing but more of the same gameplay on harder difficulties. Gameplay that itself is somewhat lacking. Grimm Eclipse is a hack and slash. Every character has a specific moveset, but they all function basically the same way. You can use light attacks and heavy attacks, as well as chain the two together, which results in differing types of heavy attacks. One of the downsides of this is that the heavy attack always ends the chain. This means that there are only about 5 combos available to any given character, a bit lacking in my opinion. Next up is ranged attacks, which every character has, including Jean. Well, at least his variation is just him running headlong at the nearest Grimm, so it doesn't really break character. For everyone aside from Jean and Pyrrha, chaining 3 ranged attacks results in a modified ranged attack. Along with these basic attacks, every character also has an ultimate attack, which is charged for use by landing hits on your enemies. These ultimates can be added to any combo, but can only be used up to 3 times before needing recharged. Every character's ultimate does instant moderate damage within a certain radius of the player, so one of the best uses for them is simply to make a quick getaway if you're being overwhelmed. Oh yeah, Jean's ult also adds a team stat boost for a little while. Yeah, he's kinda broken. There are also team attacks, which can be done by yourself? Yeah, sometimes during combat, using a heavy attack on an enemy will cause them to be stunned, and an orange icon will appear above them. When this happens, you can press a button to execute a team attack, which is basically a glorified heavy attack that does some extra damage. There is also a sort of skill tree, but it's barely worth mentioning. It never introduces anything new, all it does is add a bit of extra damage or some sort of stun effect to your attacks or give you a bit more health. Or if you're Jean, you get even more broken stat boosts. Now looking at this, it doesn't seem all bad, until you compare it to the enemies you're up against. The AI are so dumb that all they do is follow you like heat-seeking missiles until they somehow get close enough to attack you. Every enemy has 2 attacks with the exception of mini-bosses who usually have 1 more. The enemies are also designed in such a way that there are never more than 1 of them attacking you at once, but this doesn't exactly apply to the worst enemies in the game, which I'll explain later. You can counter the attacks of basic enemies to stun them, and since only 1 can attack you at a time, you can just sit there in a horde of Grimm and counter 1 at a time, charging your ultimates until you've killed them all. This is even possible in Eclipse mode. But at least it's a bit satisfying to obliterate a massive Beowulf, since you can just stand in the middle and throw a couple ults. People who are fresh to the game will have fun trying out all their moves for the first few levels, but soon they'll come to the realization that they are going to be doing the exact same thing over and over and over until the end, with virtually no variation in gameplay. I know several people who would just drop the game right then and there and never touch it again. But if you happen to be a pretty big fan of the show, chances are you'd want to at least finish the campaign before you give up on it. This is where the mechanics really break, as it is both possible and efficient to just spam whatever move is fastest, strongest, or safest depending on situation. This is especially the case on harder difficulties, considering that the only difference is the sheer number of Grimm. I personally only ever play on normal mode anymore, because anything higher is just even more of a chore. This becomes even worse when you get to the later levels and are introduced to the worst designed enemies in the entire game, the androids. These robots look pretty cool, but a lot of players quickly came to hate them because in the end, all they are is a pain to manage. The white androids aren't as bad, since they focus on mostly ranged attacks, so it's not very difficult to get up close and personal with them. That is, if they didn't fire a grenade at their feet every time you got close enough to touch them. The grenades they lob can be pretty annoying, especially in the middle of a larger fight, because it only takes 2 of them to kill you, but overall, they aren't enormously difficult to handle. The red ones, on the other hand, are really unbalanced with the rest of the game. They have long lances that they can swing and jab at you from twice as far as any other enemy, and if you get hit by one, you lose about half your aura. Also, only 1 of their attacks is counterable, and the window to counter it is a bit small. If there are any enemies besides the 1 robot, your best bet is to just run. If you don't manage to get out of range in time, you're out of luck, and you'd better hope no more enemies get the chance to attack you before you can recover. The best way to fight them is with ranged attacks, but even then you spend half the time running away because they're almost as fast as you are. These are hands down the worst things about this game. Speaking of the worst things about the game, that brings me around to the final boss fight. Oh boy. At the end of the game, you have to fight a mutated Deathstalker with a rather large health bar. So far, nothing out of the ordinary when it comes to larger scale enemies in hack and slash games. However, a closer look will reveal that there isn't really anything about this boss that makes it substantially difficult. It only attacks you directly when you're right up next to it, and the rest of the time it moves around at random and shoots barbs in somewhat your general direction. You can use ranged attacks while waiting for it to stab its stinger into the ground, and then close in and throw a couple heavies or an ultimate. The real challenge of this fight sequence is after you deplete the monster's health. Every time the health bar reaches an interval of 25%, a group of Grimm spawn along with an android or 2. Not a huge problem until you kill them and realize the androids keep respawning. The white android at the 75% mark isn't too problematic, but after you get the boss down to 50% health, a red one spawns. After that, the rest of the boss fight becomes a game of tag as you run from the red robot and wait for the boss to get its tail stuck. That's right, the minions are more difficult than the actual boss. Solely because of the androids, this fight took me 10 to 15 minutes on normal mode, and I almost died several times. I don't even want to attempt it on any harder difficulties. I have seen posts online in which people say it took over an hour to beat on Eclipse mode. Take that information, along with the fact that bringing up the menu doesn't pause the game, and I don't really see why I should invest valuable time into something for which there is absolutely no reward. There's not even an achievement for it. So for the most part, the game looks great. The maps are gorgeous, especially Forever Fall in my opinion. It really looks like locations from the world of Remnant. That being said, it's kind of ruined by the fact that there's practically zero exploring to be done. Every level is super straightforward, and there are invisible walls that surround the play area so you can't even get to some of the most beautiful areas. In fact, I had more fun finding ways to break the maps and explore outside of the play area than I did actually playing the game. The way I see it, the invisible barriers were one of the worst design choices in the game, right up there with those awful red demons. Aside from what's outside of the map, there's also an okay amount of decorative objects in the game, although some of the earlier levels could probably use a few more. The only problem with this is that the hitboxes for some of these are designed so that you can't stand on them. How does it make sense that you can't stand on a tree stump? Or a box? There are also several intangible objects as well, which is just awful. Every level basically consists of walking, fighting some enemies, then walking to the next area to fight more enemies. There's no notable amount of platforming in the game, unless you call a not so cleverly disguised jumping puzzle and sparsely placed traps that you can easily avoid decent platforming. Before I wrap this up, there's one more issue I'd like to address. The character models. Before an update a couple of years ago, the game utilized models that almost looked exactly like the show, which was great. However, the update included less detailed character models, and nobody was happy about it. Speculations as to why included helping the game run better on lower-end PCs, and I have yet to find an instance of someone claiming that it boosted performance at all. In fact, several people stated the opposite. Some people got so tired of it that they modded the old models back into the game. RT Games noticed the complaints, but they chose to ignore the ones about the models themselves aside from adding more facial expression, and updated the shader instead. Not very amusing if you ask me. All in all, I have to say Grimm Eclipse is not a very good game. It looks decent on the surface, but any minute amount of digging reveals how badly designed it is. The story feels like an awfully written fanfiction, the fight mechanics are about as basic as they could possibly be, the enemies feel like there are about 5 lines of code driving the AI, and there's not really anything at all in the gameplay that provides a feeling of accomplishment. The visuals look pretty good, but there's not enough going on, so the environments feel dead. The character models are pretty dry now, but at least that can be fixed with mods. I can firmly say that in no way is this game worth the $20 price tag. I bought it on sale for $5. If you're thinking of buying this game, I highly advise that you wait for it to go on sale as well. It's only worth about $5 because after the first few hours it just becomes something you only ever go back to once in a great while for a few minutes at a time. Overall, it's not really a terrible game, but it's not a very good one. It was announced at RTX that there was going to be an update to the game, which is supposedly going to add more to the campaign. Hopefully, it actually adds something with substance, like maybe introducing some enemies that are a challenge but not a chore. That's about all I have to say about this game at this point. Whether or not the game's any good really comes down to personal opinion. In my eyes, most of the game's potential was lost in development. So, that's all I've got for this video. I'll catch you later.